The clock on the wall read 3:09 in the morning when Mara pulled the zipper on her bag for the last time. She did not look around the room. She had made the mistake of looking around rooms before, of letting her eyes catch on the soft edges of things she had grown used to. The lamp, the chair by the window, the small patch of wall where the paint had chipped and nobody had fixed it. Looking around rooms made you stay, so she kept her eyes on the door and she walked to it. The hallway outside was empty. She had planned for that. She had spent 2 weeks learning the schedule of every guard stationed on the East Wing, writing nothing down, keeping it all in her head the way her grandmother had taught her to memorize things that mattered. Third guard shift changes at 3 a.m. The East Corridor is empty for exactly 11 minutes. She had 9 of those minutes left. She moved quietly down the hall. Her boots were in her bag. She was walking in her socks, which made no sound on the cold floor. The compound was enormous. High ceilings, wide halls, everything built to signal power without needing to explain it. She had always found it beautiful, the way you find certain things beautiful when you are not quite sure they belong to you. Not with warmth, with the careful kind of appreciation you apply to things you know you will have to leave. She reached the east side door at 3:13, pushed it open with one hand. The night air came in cold and clean, and she felt her lungs open up the way they always did outside, like they had been waiting. She had parked the car 3 streets over, not her car. A car belonging to a woman named Louise, who waitressed at a diner in town, and who owed Mara a favor she had never called in. Louise had left the keys under the driver's seat mat without asking any questions, which told Mara that Louise understood more about living in difficult situations than most people would guess from looking at her. Mara walked those 3 streets fast, not running, because running drew attention, and being calm was its own kind of armor. She found the car where it was supposed to be. She got in. She put the key in the ignition. She sat for exactly 4 seconds and breathed. Then she drove. She had thought about this moment for 6 weeks. She had imagined she would feel many things when it arrived. Fear, mostly, and a specific kind of grief she could not yet name. What she actually felt was closer to the sensation of stepping off a very high ledge into water you already knew was cold. The shock of it was real, but the cold was not a surprise. She had known it would be cold for a long time. The road out of Pack territory ran north through a stretch of pine forest before it joined the main highway. Mara drove it slowly. Not because she was uncertain, she knew every turn, but because the trees on either side of the road had always made her feel steadier, and she wanted steady right now. They were tall and dark and indifferent to everything happening in her life, which was exactly what she needed from them. She had the radio on low. Nothing important was playing. Some song about a summer that had already ended. She listened without hearing it, the way you listen to background noise when your mind is busy elsewhere. Her mind was very busy. She ran through the list again, the way she always ran the list when she was nervous. Not anxiously, but methodically, the way you check a lock before you leave a house. Money. $3,000 in a sealed envelope in the inside pocket of her bag, drawn out in small amounts over 5 weeks from a personal account Cale did not know existed. She had opened it 4 years ago under her own name, before she had a different kind of name attached to her. Phone, the burner. Prepaid, no connection to her real number. It had 3 contacts in it, none of whom were people Cale had ever met. Clothes, a week's worth, nothing more, because heavy bags made you look like someone going somewhere. She had wanted to look like someone going nowhere in particular. At the bottom of her bag, beneath everything else, wrapped in an old piece of flannel the color of dust, was a cassette tape. She did not think about the tape. She pressed the thought down the same way you press down on a bruise you do not have time for right now, and she kept driving. It took her 4 hours to reach the town she had chosen. She had not chosen it for any romantic reason. She had chosen it because it was far enough, small enough, and because it had a motel that took cash, and did not require an ID if you looked calm when you walked in. She had learned that trick from a woman she had met years ago, who had needed to disappear for a while for reasons she had never shared. The woman had told her, "Always look like you are running to something, not away from it. People ask fewer questions when you seem to have a destination." The motel was called the Green Pine Lodge, which was optimistic because there were no pine trees nearby, and the paint on the sign was the color of old grass. But the woman at the desk had kind eyes and no questions, and the room had a bed with a clean blanket and a window that looked out onto a laundromat. Mara put her bag down. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the window for a while. Through the glass, she could see the laundromat sign buzzing faintly, blue and white, casting a quiet light onto the sidewalk below. A man in a coat was sitting on a bench outside it, reading something on his phone. A cat crossed the street slowly and disappeared between two parked cars. She thought, no one knows where I am. The thought was enormous. It filled the room. She put her hand on her stomach, just for a moment, just lightly, the way you touch something you are not yet ready to talk about out loud. 3 weeks earlier, she had taken the test on a Tuesday morning in the bathroom of the compound, with the door locked and the fan running so no one would hear. She had sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time afterward. The test had been clear. There was no ambiguity in it. She had looked at it for a while and then she had folded it very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of the jacket she was wearing, and she had gone downstairs to breakfast and poured herself coffee and eaten toast and spoken normally to the 2 council members who were present at the table. That was when she knew she was good at this, at keeping things inside herself until she was ready to do something with them. She was still deciding what to do with this one. She changed into a clean shirt, the kind that was soft and worn in, and cost nothing. She lay down on top of the blanket because she was not yet ready to get under it. Getting under a blanket felt like settling, and she needed a few more hours before she was willing to settle. She stared at the ceiling. The ceiling had a water stain in one corner shaped vaguely like a running horse, or maybe a large dog, and she spent a few minutes deciding which one it was before exhaustion made the decision for her, and she closed her eyes. She did not sleep quickly. Sleep had always been something she negotiated with, not something that simply arrived. She lay in the dark motel room and listened to the faint buzzing of the laundromat sign and thought about the sequence of things she would need to do. She would need a longer-term room. She would need a way to earn money without leaving a trail. She would need to find a doctor, and that was the part of the list she let herself think about only briefly, because the weight of it was heavier than the others, and she was not ready for that weight yet. She would also need to stop running the list and sleep. She did, eventually. A few hours of the thin kind of sleep that does not fully quiet a person but gives them enough to continue. She woke at 7:30 when a truck went by loudly enough to rattle the window. She sat up. She looked at the room. The water-stained horse was still there. She thought, good morning. She washed her face in the bathroom sink, which had decent water pressure and a small cake of soap wrapped in paper. She got dressed. She put money in her coat pocket and left the room. The diner across the street was called Helen's. It was the kind of place that had probably been called Helen's for 40 years and had no intention of changing. The booths were red vinyl with silver edges. There was a pie case near the door, with 3 different pies in it. The smell of coffee hit her when she opened the door, and her body responded to it before her mind could catch up, and for exactly 3 seconds she felt ordinary. She sat at the counter. A woman came over with a menu and a coffee pot and said, "Coffee first?" Mara said yes. The woman poured it and left the pot nearby in case she wanted more. Mara wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the specials board. She ordered eggs and toast. She ate slowly and watched the diner fill up with the morning kind of people. The ones who had places to be, jobs to get to, kids to drop off. A man in a work jacket sat 2 stools down and read the paper and drank his coffee without speaking to anyone, which she appreciated. She paid in cash. She tipped well, because she had always believed in tipping well, especially at the beginning of a relationship with a place you intended to return to. She walked back to the motel. She sat on the bed. She took out the burner phone. She had 3 contacts, and she sent a message to only one of them. The message said, "I am here. I am fine." The person on the other end would understand what that meant. A response came back in 4 minutes. Good. Stay dark for now. She put the phone face down on the mattress and looked at the window again. The laundromat was open now. Through the glass, she could see machines running, clothes tumbling inside the round windows. A woman was folding shirts on the counter, with the practiced speed of someone who had folded a great many shirts. Mara thought that the room above the laundromat probably had better light than this room. She would ask about it tomorrow. Today was for sitting still and letting the fact of being gone settle into her body. She had learned this from years of watching other people not give themselves enough time to adjust. You ran, and then you needed a day in which you simply existed somewhere new and let your nervous system understand that you were, in fact, somewhere new. If you did not do that, your body kept expecting the old place to reassert itself. And you spent all your energy braced against an attack that was not coming, instead of planning for the ones that might. The compound by now would have noticed. She did not let herself picture it in detail. She knew what the morning looked like there. She had lived inside that morning for 2 years. The way the light came in through the east windows at 7. The way the kitchen staff had breakfast laid out in the main dining room by 6:30. The way certain people sat in certain chairs like those chairs belonged to them specifically. The way Cale sat at the head of everything, not because he needed to demonstrate authority, but because he was simply the kind of person rooms arranged themselves around. She pressed the thought flat. She had not left because he was a bad man. She had left because being near a good man, who held too much power over your future, was sometimes just as dangerous as being near a bad one. The difference was that with a bad man, you could justify the running to anyone who asked. With a good man you had to justify it to yourself, which was harder, and the justification had to be airtight, because part of you would always want to believe there was another way. She had spent 6 weeks building that justification. She had used the best materials she had, her mother's story, her grandmother's voice on a tape she had not played in 3 years, the specific language of pack succession law that she had read herself, alone, in the compound library at 2 in the morning 6 weeks ago when she could not sleep. The justification was solid. She trusted it. She lay back on the bed again. Outside, the laundromat sign buzzed on. Someone in the room next door turned on a television. The sound came through the wall, low and indistinct, the way all television sounds through a wall, just noise shaped like voices. She thought about the name she would give the child. She had been thinking about names for 3 weeks, just quietly, just turning them over in her mind, the way you turn a stone in your hand. She had not settled on anything yet, but she thought about it. She thought about her grandmother. She did not play the tape. She pressed the thought down, the way she had been pressing it for 3 years, and she looked at the ceiling, and the water-stained horse ran and went nowhere, and the buzzing of the sign went on, and outside the window the morning moved along without asking for anything from her, which was, right now, exactly what she needed. By the time the evening came and the light through the window turned gold, and then orange and then gone, Mara had made 4 decisions. She would ask about the room above the laundromat in the morning. She would stay in this town for at least 6 weeks and reassess. She would not contact anyone in the pack, not directly, not indirectly, not for any reason she was not currently able to imagine, and she would find a doctor by the end of the week, because whatever else was uncertain, the thing growing quietly inside her was not capable of waiting for her to feel ready. She made herself a cup of tea on the small kettle on the dresser. There was 1 tea bag left in the motel's small basket of supplies. She used it. She drank the tea standing by the window, watching the laundromat below. The woman who folded shirts was still there, still folding, a different pile now. The door opened, and a man came in with a bag of laundry, and the woman looked up and smiled at him, and he smiled back, and there was something about the ease of that exchange, the simple, weightless ease of 2 people who did not have to be careful about anything, that Mara watched for longer than she meant to. She finished her tea. She rinsed the cup. She turned down the blanket and got into the bed properly this time, the way someone who had decided to sleep gets into a bed. She thought, I am here. I chose this. I am keeping us safe. She closed her eyes. She slept. She dreamed of nothing she would remember in the morning, which was, all things considered, a mercy. Outside, 3 streets over, the car she had borrowed from Louise sat in the dark, with the windows gathering dew. The engine had long since gone cold. The cassette tape at the bottom of Mara's bag lay wrapped in its flannel cloth, patient and silent, waiting for the moment she would finally be ready to press play. That moment was not tonight. Tonight was only for surviving. And she was doing that very well. The town around her settled into its own quiet. Lights went off in windows. The diner across the street dimmed. The laundromat sign buzzed on through the dark, the only thing in the whole street that did not seem to need rest. Mara breathed in the darkness of her small rented room, 4 hours away from everything she had left, and the silence held her without requiring anything in return. It was the best silence she had experienced in 2 years. She let it. Cale Drennan did not shout. That was the first thing that Soren noticed when he brought the news. He had prepared himself for the shouting, had braced for it the way you brace for a wave you can see coming from a distance. Soren had been Cale's second for 6 years, and in those 6 years he had seen the man angry enough times to know the shape of it. It was not quiet. Kale angry was a specific kind of force, like pressure building in a closed room, and when it released, it was loud and certain, and left no ambiguity about where it had gone. But this morning, when Soren walked into the study at 6 and said, quietly, "She is gone," Kale did not make a sound. He was standing at the window. The study was on the north side of the compound, and the window looked out over the grounds, the training yard, the tree line, the road that ran out toward the highway. He was already dressed, already had coffee in his hand. He was not a man who slept late, and this morning he was clearly a man who had not slept at all. He turned from the window when Soren spoke. His face did not change. He said, "When?" "We think sometime after 3, Soren said. "Third shift rotation. There is a gap in the east corridor coverage. She knew about it." Kale said nothing. He set his coffee cup down on the corner of the desk without looking at where he was putting it. It landed perfectly. He crossed to the desk and sat down, slowly, the way a person sits when they are choosing very carefully how much of themselves to show. "Her room," he said. "Empty. Personal belongings gone. She left nothing." He was quiet for a moment. "The car. The old sedan from the east lot is missing," Soren said. Then he corrected himself. "Not from the lot. She did not take one of ours. But Henley tracked a vehicle on the east road at 3:14 this morning, from the camera near the tree line. Plates are registered to a woman in town, Louise Kane. She works at a diner." Kale's expression moved fractionally at this, something in his jaw, and then it was gone. "She planned this," he said. "Yes," Soren said. The word sat between them. It was not a comfortable word. It had weight and implications, and neither of them was ready to examine all of them at once. Kale stood up. He went to the window again. He stood there with his hands at his sides, and Soren watched him look out over the training yard, where 2 men were running drills in the pale early light, unaware that anything was different about this morning. The world outside the study was completely ordinary. That was the particular cruelty of this kind of morning. "3 things," Kale said. He said it the way he said everything, carefully, with no more words than necessary. "Soren, double the perimeter watch on all 4 borders by 7 o'clock. Get Henley on the woman, Louise Kane. Find out what she knows and when she knew it, and reassign Graves and Cole from the West detail to tracking." Soren wrote nothing down. He never did. "And if Graves finds her quickly?" Kale did not answer immediately. He kept looking out the window. One of the men in the yard stopped running and bent to tie his boot, and Kale watched this, as though it were something he needed to understand. "Then he reports to me directly," Kale said. "Not to anyone else, not to the council, to me." "Understood. Go." Soren went. Kale stood at the window for a long time, after he heard the door close. He stood with his hands very still at his sides, which was a thing he had taught himself to do years ago, the keeping of still hands, because his hands gave him away when the rest of him did not. They were the one part of him he had never fully learned to manage. He was managing them now. He thought about the last week. He ran through it the way he ran through everything, methodically and without flinching, looking for the specific moment that he had missed. Because he had missed something. She had planned this for weeks, maybe more, and she had done it inside a compound he ran, in a house full of people who reported to him, and he had not seen it. That was the part that sat strangely, not that she had gone. The going was something he was not ready to look at directly, not yet. That was a separate, larger thing, and he needed to keep it behind a door for now. What he could look at was the competence of it, the planning. She had known about the corridor gap, which meant she had studied the rotation, which meant she had been watching and learning the patterns of his house for weeks, while he had been standing in the same rooms as her and seeing nothing but what she let him see. He had always known she was capable. He had not known she had been applying that capability to this. He did not know whether to be angry or to feel something else entirely. He pressed the question down. Anger was useful. The other thing was not right now. He crossed to the desk. He sat down again. He opened the drawer on the left side of the desk, the one that was always locked, and took out the folder inside it. He had not looked at this folder in 2 months. He had told himself he would not need to look at it. The folder contained documents, PAC succession law, line of inheritance provisions, the specific legal language that governed the status of a child born to the Alpha King's designated partner. He had read these documents many times. He knew what they said. He put the folder back in the drawer without opening it, and he locked the drawer again. He sat very still. He thought about Mara in a way he had not allowed himself to think about her since the moment Soren had said the words, "She is gone." He thought about her specifically, not as an abstraction, not as a problem, but as a person. The way she moved. The way she thought about everything just slightly ahead of when the situation required it. The way she had sat across from him at the dinner table 3 nights ago and talked about a book she had read, and the way she had been completely present in that conversation, interested and warm, and there, and he had felt, in that particular ordinary moment, that things were fine. She had been planning to leave the next morning. He had not known, had not sensed it, had read it as warmth when it was farewell. That was the part that reached him, and he did not examine it further because there was work to do. He stood up, he put on his coat. He walked out of the study and into the hall, and his face was the same as it always was, controlled and unreadable, and giving nothing away. And the people he passed on his way through the compound nodded at him the way they always did, respectfully and without lingering, because that was the way of things in his house. He walked past the room she had slept in. The door was open. He did not stop. He kept walking. By 7 in the morning, the border watch had doubled. Henley had brought Louise Kane in for a quiet conversation that revealed, after 20 minutes, that Louise had no idea where Mara had gone, and had lent the car only because Mara had asked her for it quietly, 2 days ago. And Louise was not the sort of person who asked too many questions when someone she liked needed a favor. Henley reported that Louise was telling the truth. Cale told Henley to let Louise go, and to make sure she was not inconvenienced further. By 9, Graves and Cole were on the road. By 10, the council had been informed that Mara had left the compound unexpectedly, and the council had questions that Cale was not in the mood for. He attended the meeting at 10:30. He sat at the head of the table. He listened to the questions, the careful ones, the ones wrapped in concern, but built on something harder underneath, the ones about what this meant for succession and stability, and the pack's long-term planning. He answered none of them directly. He said that the situation was being addressed. He said that he would provide further information when it was available. He said that the meeting was over. Elder Voss, no relation to Mara, though the coincidence of the name had always struck people as awkward, said, with the measured patience of someone who had been in council rooms for a very long time, "Cale, this is not just a personal matter. If there is a... The meeting is over," Cale said. He said it the same way he had said everything else that morning, quietly, without raising his voice, but with a quality underneath it that made Elder Voss stop speaking, and made the other council members study the table, and made the room go very still for a moment. He left the meeting. He went back to the study. He locked the door. He stood in the middle of the room and breathed for a moment, the way he almost never allowed himself to do in spaces where anyone could see him. He was not angry at Mara. He had checked for that carefully. What he felt was more complicated and less convenient than anger, and it had something to do with the image of her at the dinner table 3 nights ago, warm and present, and saying goodbye to him in a language he had not understood. He sat down at the desk. There was a coffee cup on the corner of it. Not his. It had been there since yesterday morning. Mara had brought it in when she came to speak with him about something he was now struggling to remember, and she had set it down, and they had talked and she had left, and the cup had stayed. His staff had not touched it, because they never touched things on his desk without being asked. He looked at the cup for a long moment. He did not move it. He pulled a folder of reports toward him, and he began to read them with the same focused, quiet efficiency he brought to all work, and he read them for an hour without stopping, and he was very good at it. Outside the window, the training yard was empty now. The morning had moved into that quiet middle space, where nothing looked particularly different from any other day. The compound stood. The borders were watched. The pack moved through its business. A man named Graves was driving north. Another named Cole was already asking questions in the first town on the likely route. Cale read his reports. He did not look at the coffee cup again. But he did not move it. He did not move it all morning. By afternoon, the council had reconvened without him, and passed 3 resolutions he would find out about later, not because they were hiding them, but because he had locked the door of his study and declined to attend. He would not find out until the following day, And what he found would be the beginning of something that surprised even him. The discovery that he was willing, for the first time in 6 years of holding power, to let the machine run without him. Not because he had given up, because something in him was already redirecting. He was not ready to name it yet. He was still in the part where he pressed things flat and kept going. But the coffee cup stayed where it was. And that, if you knew Cale Drennan, was something. By evening the compound was full of a particular kind of silence. Not empty, but careful. People spoke in lower voices. The staff moved efficiently, and without unnecessary noise. Nobody needed to be told to do this. They had simply read the day and responded to it, the way a household adjusts itself to the mood of the weather. Soren checked in at 7. He had nothing definitive. The tracking had 3 possible routes, all north. He reported this without any expression that could be read as concern, because Soren had learned a long time ago that what Cale needed most from him was steadiness. Cale said, "Keep going," and Soren nodded and left. Cale ate alone that night. The dining room felt cavernous with just him at the table, but it always had, and this was nothing new. He ate without appetite and without complaint, and he sat with his coffee afterward and looked at the empty chair across from him, which was a thing he did not usually allow himself to do. He allowed it tonight. For about 90 seconds. Then he stood up. He cleared his own plate, which he never did, and the young woman who was clearing the table nearby froze in the practiced way of someone trying not to react visibly. He said, "Good evening," to her, and walked out. He went back to the study. He sat down. He looked at the coffee cup. He thought, "I will find her." The thought was completely quiet inside him. No anger in it. No demand. Just the certainty of a person who has decided on a direction and does not need noise to confirm the decision. "I will find her." He turned off the light on the desk and sat in the dark for a little while, which was something nobody would have believed if they had been told. Then he turned it back on and went back to work. The reports waited. The pack needed things. There were decisions to be made, and letters to sign and calls to return, and he was still the man who did all of that, and he would still be that man tomorrow. But the cup stayed on the corner of the desk, and the chair across the dining table was exactly where it had always been. And somewhere north on a road that his trackers were narrowing down, slowly, carefully, the way you narrow down something that matters, a woman was sleeping in a room she had chosen for herself, above a laundromat with a buzzing sign. And she was, in this moment, safe. Both of these things were true at the same time. The night held them both, without resolving the distance between them. And that distance, for now, was exactly what she needed it to be. Mara was 16 years old the first time she understood what pack law meant for a woman who carried something the pack wanted. She had not understood it as law. She had understood it as a sound. The sound of her mother standing outside a closed door. The specific sound of someone who has just been told a thing they have known was coming, and still were not prepared for when it arrived. She was 16. She pressed her ear against the cold wall of the hallway, and she listened to that sound. And when it stopped, she walked back to her room, and she sat on her bed, and she thought for a very long time. She was 24 now. Sitting at the small table in her room above the laundromat, which she had moved into 3 days after arriving in town, because the room had better light, and a window that faced east, and a landlady named Dot, who left clean towels outside doors, and did not ask what you did for work. The room was small. It had a table, a chair, a bed, a narrow wardrobe, and a bathroom the size of a generous closet. The ceiling sloped on one side. The window over the table looked down onto the street, and in the mornings the light came through it, at exactly the angle that made a cup of tea look like something from a painting. She had bought tea. She had bought bread and eggs, and a small jar of honey. She had found a second-hand bookshop 2 streets over, and bought 3 books, chosen for their thickness and for having nothing to do with anything familiar. She was building a life in small increments, the way you build anything that needs to last. The pregnancy book was from the pharmacy. She had bought it with cash, slipping it under a magazine she did not want. She had read the first 40 pages the night she bought it, and then put it on the table and looked at it for a while, the way you look at something that has changed the scale of the room. She was 8 weeks along. She had confirmed this with a doctor, a general practitioner named Dr. Carroll, who worked out of a small practice above a pharmacy 4 blocks from her building. She had given him a name that was not her name, and paid in cash, and he had not seemed particularly interested in the details she did not volunteer. He was a quiet man with reading glasses and clean hands and a very steady voice, which was what she needed from a doctor right now. He had told her the dates, the schedule, the things to watch for. He had given her a pamphlet and a referral for a formal obstetric appointment, and she had taken both and said thank you and left. She had sat on a bench outside afterward for 15 minutes before she trusted herself to walk normally. Not because anything was wrong. Everything was, by medical assessment, progressing as expected. She had sat on the bench because there had been a moment in that office when Dr. Carroll had said the word healthy with the particular quiet confidence of someone reporting a fact, when something inside her had shifted, rearranged itself around a new weight, and the rearrangement had been so sudden that she needed a bench and some sky and a few minutes to let her body catch up. She was going to have a child. She had known this. She had been carrying the knowledge of it for weeks, but hearing it confirmed in a room with fluorescent lighting and medical charts on the wall made it specific in a way it had not been before. Specific and real and hers. She walked home after the bench. She made tea. She stood at her window and looked down at the street for a while, watching the laundromat below open up and the first customers of the morning come in with their bags. This town was a good town. She had decided this with the particular care she applied to everything. It was small without being suspicious. Big enough that a new face did not immediately require explanation. Small enough that you would notice quickly if something was wrong. The people at Helen's diner knew her order by her third visit. The woman at the bookshop had held back a novel she thought Mara would like. Dot, her landlady, had knocked on her door one evening with a plate of food and simply said, "I made too much," which Mara recognized as the kind of kindness that does not require acknowledgement. She was growing something here. Not permanence. She was too careful for permanence. But a temporary life that held together, that had texture and routine, and the small comforts of being known in small ways by nearby people. She thought about her mother almost every day. Not with grief, exactly. The grief was old enough that it had changed shape, become more architectural than acute. But she thought about her with the specific attention of someone studying a map of territory they intended not to enter. Her mother had been 22 when she came to the pack. She had not come by choice in the way Mara understood choice. She had come as part of an arrangement between her family and the pack's then alpha, a man whose name Mara knew, but had always refused to speak aloud, because names were a kind of power, and some people deserved none of the power their names carried. Her mother had been, by all accounts, a composed and intelligent woman. She had navigated pack life with a grace that other people mistook for contentment. Mara had grown up watching that composure and understanding, slowly, that it was not contentment, but craft. Her mother had been doing what Mara would spend her own life learning to do, keeping the useful parts of herself out of sight, where they would not become property. When Mara's mother became pregnant, 3 years after arriving at the pack, in circumstances that were complicated and that Mara had only assembled the full shape of in her mid-20s, the pack council had begun its involvement before the child was born. They had been careful about it. They had used language like provision and structure and security. They had written documents. They had presented those documents as gifts. The child, Mara's older brother, Liam, who was now 31, and lived in a city 3 states away and spoke to her twice a year, had been formally named a pack heir at 6 weeks old. His mother had been given a title. The title came with requirements. The requirements were dressed in the language of honor and had the structure of a cage. Mara's mother had stayed. She had reasons for staying. Some of them Mara understood, and some of them she had not understood until she was old enough to know what it cost to leave. Her grandmother had left. That was the other part of the story, the part that had always mattered most to Mara, though she had never talked about it to anyone. Her grandmother, Eleanor, a woman whose face Mara knew only from 2 photographs and a cassette tape, had been the one to go. She had left when Mara's mother was still very young, before any of the things that would later happen had happened. She had left because she saw what was coming, or maybe because she simply decided that staying would cost her something she was not willing to pay. The full reason had never been clearly explained to Mara. What she had was the tape. Her grandmother had recorded it 6 months before she died, in the kitchen of a house in another state, addressing the recording to Mara's mother. The tape had arrived, somehow, after the death. passed along through distant family who perhaps did not know what it was. Mara's mother had never played it in front of anyone. After her death, when Mara had found it in the small box her mother kept at the back of her wardrobe, she had held it in her hand for a long time before taking it. She had played it once, 3 years ago, alone. The contents of it were nothing spectacular. Her grandmother was talking about a recipe, a bread recipe, specific and detailed, the kind of recipe that assumes the listener knows certain things already and builds from there. She laughed once at herself for forgetting an ingredient. She said her mother's name twice, naturally, in the course of speaking, the way you say the name of someone you talk to every day. Near the end of the tape, she said, "I know I am not there, and I know that means something. I hope you understand it as love." That was all. Mara had listened to those 12 minutes once, and put the tape away, and had not played it again. She carried it with her, because the alternative, leaving it somewhere, was not something she could consider. But she was not ready for it. She was not sure what she was waiting to be ready for. She only knew that she would know when the moment arrived. She thought about Eleanor a lot. She thought about what it meant to be a woman who understood the shape of something before it closed around her, and who moved before it could. She thought about the courage of that, and also the cost. The daughter who grew up without her, the grandchildren she never met, the gap in the family where she had been. Mara was not making the same choice Eleanor had made. She was not leaving the child. She was keeping it with her, close, and that was the central fact of everything she had planned. She was leaving the structure that would claim the child without asking for her permission, the structure that would use the language of protection and provision to mean something much more like ownership. She had read the succession law. She knew exactly what would happen if she stayed, what timeline would activate, what documents would be drawn up, what choices would be made on behalf of a person too small to make them. She would not do to her child what had been done to Liam. Liam, who was 31, and lived 3 states away, and spoke to her twice a year. Liam, who had grown up knowing he was special in the way that objects in museum cases are special, important to the institution, unavailable for ordinary life. Liam, who she loved, and who she could feel, in their twice-yearly calls, working hard not to let her see how tired he was. She would not do that. She pressed her palm against her stomach, lightly, the way she had started doing when she sat quietly, a habit she had noticed herself developing, this small recurring gesture of acknowledgement. The morning outside her window was bright. The street below was moving through its Tuesday. A man walked by with 2 dogs. A woman in a yellow coat stopped to look at something in the window of the shop opposite. The traffic light at the end of the block went green, and a car moved through it. All of it was so ordinary it was almost loud with ordinariness. She thought about Cale. She allowed herself to think about him the way you allow yourself to eat something you know is too rich. Carefully, in small amounts, with the full knowledge that too much would not serve you. She thought about the way he looked when he was listening to something that mattered, how his attention changed, became more precise, more directed, like light narrowing. She thought about how he had told her once, standing in the hallway outside the library at some late hour, that he had taught himself to read very fast as a child, because the books in his family's house were shared, and you did not always get to keep one as long as you needed it. He had said this without any self-pity, just as information, a small true thing offered without orchestration. She thought about how she had found that more revealing than anything else he had ever said in a formal context. She thought about how he was going to look for her. She had always known he would look. He was not a man who let things go, not because of ego, but because it was not in his nature to not know where something important had gone. He would look, carefully, methodically, without drama, the same way he did everything. She had planned for that too. She could not plan forever, though. That was what she was reckoning with, sitting at her east-facing table with the morning light, and the pregnancy book, and the cassette tape in the flannel cloth at the bottom of her bag. She could plan for now. She had done that. But the longer this went on, the more the territory she had not planned for would grow, and somewhere in that unplanned territory was the question she kept pressing down, the one that was growing the same way everything inside her was growing, steadily, and without permission. What does it cost a child to not know its father? She had an answer. She had lived near that answer. She knew what the cost was. She had seen it in Liam's careful voice on the phone, and in her own habit of measuring everything before she offered it. But she also knew what the other cost was. She sat with both of them. The tea cooled. The morning moved. Below her, the laundromat ran its machines, and the clothes turned in the round windows, and the woman she now knew was named Clara, folded things with her quick, practiced hands. Mara opened the pregnancy book and found her page, and read another 10 pages without stopping. The child she was carrying did not have a name yet, but it had a room, of sorts, small and slanted and full of east light, and it had a mother who was very good at surviving things, which was not nothing, which was in fact quite a lot. Outside, the town went about its Tuesday, and Mara turned the page. The council chamber at the Northern Pack compound had 14 seats, arranged around an oval table made of dark wood. For 60 years, those 14 seats had been filled at every formal session. In the past 3 weeks, for the first time in recorded Pack history, one of them had been left empty. Elder Voss had placed her resignation letter on the table at the end of the last session and walked out without further ceremony. She had been in that seat for 18 years. She had not told anyone she was going to leave it. She had simply stood up, placed the letter down with the particular quiet of someone who has made a decision they will not be revisiting, and gone. The remaining 13 council members had looked at the letter and then at each other. None of them had looked at Cale, which was, Soren thought, watching all of this from his position at the side of the room, its own kind of information. He reported the resignation to Cale that same evening. Cale was at his desk, working through correspondence, and he looked up when Soren spoke and was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Was she angry?" "No," Soren said. "She was not angry." Cale nodded very slightly and went back to the correspondence. Soren stood there for a moment, because there was more to say and he was trying to find the right order for it. "The council passed 3 resolutions at the afternoon session," he said, "while you were unavailable." Cale set down his pen. "Which ones?" Soren told him. The first 2 were administrative, the kind of routine matters that moved through council chambers whether anyone was watching or not. The third was not administrative. The third was a formal directive authorizing the Pack's legal team to prepare succession documentation, to be held in readiness, for the Alpha Heir. The room was very quiet while Soren said this. Cale said, "They know?" "They suspect," Soren said carefully. "There has been nothing confirmed. But her departure in these specific circumstances, and the timing, people are connecting things." Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Call them off." "I can try," Soren said. "But the resolution passed at a formal session. Reversing it requires another session and a majority vote. And right now the mood in that room is—" He paused. "Cautious is the word I would use." "Cautious," Cale repeated. "They are worried about the Pack's future, and they are expressing that worry in the only language they have." Cale stood up. He went to the window. He did not look at the training yard this time. He looked at the road, the stretch of it visible between the trees. He looked at it for long enough that Soren began to think the conversation might be over. Then Cale said, "How many of them would follow my direction over the councils, if it came to that?" "A majority," Soren said, "but not a large one, and not if they believe you are prioritizing a personal matter over Pack stability." "And do they believe that?" Another careful pause. "Some of them are beginning to." Cale turned from the window. His face was the same as always, controlled and unreadable. But there was something in his eyes that Soren did not usually see there. Not anger. Something more difficult. He said, "And what do you believe?" Soren looked at him. They had known each other for 12 years, long enough that certain things did not need wrapping. "I believe you are operating from a clearer position than they know," he said, "and I believe the situation is more complicated than the council is allowing for." Cale said nothing. "I also believe," Soren continued, "that Ryan is going to push for a full sweep before the week is out. He came to me this morning, early, before you were awake. He wants authorization for a territory-wide search. He wants to use contacts in 3 neighboring territories." "He would need my signature for that," Cale said. "He is planning to argue that the succession directive gives the council concurrent authority to authorize a search in this instance." Cale was very still. "He is wrong about that." "Yes," Soren said, "but he will not stop being wrong quietly. He is." Another pause. "Ren believes he is protecting the Pack. He is not doing this from ambition. He is doing it from genuine conviction that the Pack's future is at risk, and that decisive action is required." "I know why Ren does what he does," Cale said. "I know him." "Then you know he will not wait indefinitely for your direction." The silence that followed was the particular kind that happens in a room when both people in it are aware that something has shifted and are measuring how far it has gone. Cale said, "Tell him I will speak with him tomorrow." "Not tonight. Tomorrow." Soren nodded. He turned to leave. "Soren." Cale's voice stopped him at the door. "Elder Voss's seat. Do not fill it yet." Soren turned back. He looked at Cale for a moment. Then he said, "All right," and left. Cale stood in the study alone. He thought about Elder Voss. She was not a woman he had ever been particularly warm with. She had a quality of watching that he sometimes found uncomfortable, because it was the quality of someone who saw more than they said, and that had always made him wary in the way that only accurate observers made him wary. She had known Mara's mother. He had known that for a long time, without knowing what to do with the information. He thought about what it meant that she had left. She had not left angry. Soren had been clear about that. She had left the way you leave something you have given up trying to change. That was different from anger, and harder. He sat down. He picked up the pen he had put down. He looked at the correspondence in front of him. He thought about Rin. Rin was 38 and had been the pack's head enforcer for 9 years, and was, by the metrics that mattered in his role, excellent at it. He was also a man whose thinking moved in straight lines, which was an enormous advantage in situations that were also straight lines, and an enormous complication in situations that were not. He would conduct a full sweep of 3 territories, with the thoroughness of a mathematical proof, and that sweep would expose the pack's reach to people outside it, who currently had no reason to be interested in the pack's business. Attention, Cale had learned years ago, was something you spent very carefully, because you only had so much before it started spending you. Beyond the political cost, and the political cost was real, there was something else, something Cale kept having to push aside, and returning to against his intention. A full sweep meant finding Mara by force of institutional machinery, rather than by anything more considered. It meant she would be found the way a missing asset is found, rather than the way a person is found. And Cale did not think that was the right way. He was not sure yet what the right way was. He only knew that Rin's way was not it. He put the pen down again. He opened the left drawer and looked at the folder and closed it without taking it out. He thought about the succession documents the council had authorized in that afternoon session while he was unavailable. The future child of the Alpha King, born to a designated partner, would be entitled under pack law to formal recognition within 3 months of birth. The council had the authority to initiate certain proceedings, independent of the Alpha's direct instruction, in matters touching the pack's long-term stability. This was not a loophole. It was a feature of the law, designed for exactly the situation it was now being applied to. He had written some of that law. He had written it to protect the pack in the event that an Alpha became incapacitated or otherwise unable to act. He had not written it imagining he would one day sit on the other side of it. He thought, she read this law. She read it and understood it, and she left before it could be used. He sat with the shape of that, the precision of it, the specific intelligence of someone who had studied the mechanism that endangered them and had acted before it could engage. He had, without intending to, made the threat she was running from more understandable to himself by reading the same documents she must have read. He almost thought she was right to go. He pressed that thought down. He was not ready for it yet. Outside the door, the compound went about its evening. He could hear it faintly, the low sounds of a large household settling into the later hours. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed. Somewhere further away, someone's voice, too distant to make out the words. He thought about the pack. He had been Alpha for 6 years. He had inherited it young and under circumstances that were not gentle, and he had spent those 6 years building something that held together, that functioned, that gave the people inside it security and continuity, and the sense of being part of something that would persist. He had worked very hard for that. He had sacrificed things that had cost him. He believed in the pack, but he was sitting in his study at 9 in the evening, thinking about a woman who had read his own laws and found in them a reason to run, and the thing he kept returning to was not the pack's stability, or the council's resolutions, or Rin's plans, or the succession documents. The thing he kept returning to was the image of her at the dinner table, 3 nights before she left, warm and present, and saying goodbye in a language he had not known to listen for. He had missed it entirely. He was very good at reading rooms, at reading people. at reading the subtext of situations before they became explicit. That was one of the things that made him effective, and he had sat across a table from this particular person and missed the largest thing she was doing. That interested him. It interested him the way things interest a person who is trying to understand rather than simply respond. He stood up. He put on his coat. He walked out of the study, through the hall, and outside into the night air. He walked across the training yard slowly. Not going anywhere, just walking. The air was cold and clean, and above him the sky had the particular density of a night with no cloud, stars very clear and very distant. He walked to the east side of the compound. He stood at the door she had used. He pushed it open. He stood in the doorway and looked out at the road that ran between the compound and the tree line. He thought, she walked this at 3 in the morning in her socks. He stood there for a while. The night was very still. Then he went back inside, locked the door behind him, and went to bed. He did not sleep quickly. He lay in the dark and breathed, and thought about 17 different things, without resolving any of them, and eventually, sleep arrived in the partial, insufficient way it had been arriving all week. In the morning, there were more reports, more decisions, more of the machinery of a large enterprise requiring its operator. And Graves called at 7 with news. 3 routes had been narrowed to 1. Cale listened to this with his eyes closed and the phone pressed to his ear, standing in the middle of his study in the early morning light. He said, "Keep narrowing it. Do not stop." He hung up. He stood in the middle of the room. He thought, I am going to find her myself. Not Graves. Not Cole. Not with a full sweep. Him. He had not made this decision before this morning. It arrived the way certain important things arrived, not as the result of reasoning, but as the end of reasoning, the place where all the thinking had been going, without announcing its destination. He would go himself, quietly, alone, or nearly, when Graves had something specific enough. He did not know what would happen after that. He was, for the first time in several years, genuinely uncertain about the outcome of something, and he was surprised to find that the uncertainty felt not like weakness, but like the first honest thing he had felt all week. He went to the window. The training yard was wet with morning dew. A bird sat on the fence post at the south corner. Everything was quiet and ordinary. He thought of her east-facing window, wherever it was. It sat between 2 low hills, in the kind of landscape that did not invite postcards but did invite people who needed to disappear for a while. Flat and modest and unremarkable in all the ways that make a place genuinely livable. Mara had learned the names of 3 streets. She had found the library and the pharmacy and the second-hand bookshop and the diner, and she had established the quiet geography of a person who intends to last somewhere. She walked the same routes at the same hours, not from a lack of imagination but because routine was camouflage. Unusual behavior attracted attention. The most invisible thing you could be was the woman who ordered the same eggs every morning at the counter of Helen's diner, and read whatever she was reading, and paid in cash, and tipped well, and left. She had been here for 5 weeks, long enough that Clara, who ran the laundromat below her room, had started saving the morning paper for her, because she had mentioned once that she liked to read it with tea, long enough that Dot had started calling her Mara, without any self-consciousness, the way people use names when they are no longer provisional. She was not happy, exactly, but she was something adjacent to it, something she had not been in long enough that she had trouble naming it. She was stable. She was present. She was making her own decisions, small ones and larger ones, and she was living with their consequences without anyone revising them. She had an appointment with an obstetrician next week. She had found one in the next town over, far enough that it would not be the same office as Dr. Carroll, which felt safer, though she could not have fully explained why. She had a name she was using. She had a cash system that worked. She had started to feel, in a way that surprised her, something like peace. It was a fragile thing, and she held it carefully. The way you hold something you know is not fully yours yet, but are hoping to earn. On a Tuesday afternoon in the 6th week, Dot knocked on her door at 5 in the evening, with a plate of something that smelled like onions and butter, and said, as always, made too much. Mara let her in, which she did not always do. Dot set the plate on the table and looked at the room with the friendly, unintrusive interest of someone who has kept properties for a long time, and has learned the difference between privacy and secrecy. She did not look at Mara's bag, or the pregnancy book on the table, or the small jar of ginger chews on the windowsill, that were there for reasons she had not asked about. She said, "You settling in all right?" "Yes," Mara said. "Thank you." Dot nodded. She said, "This room held a young woman for 2 years once. Artist. She painted on the walls in pencil, very lightly, faces, and when she left, I could not bring myself to paint over them for about a year." She paused. "I did eventually." Mara did not know what to say to this. Dot said, "Anyway," which is what people say when they have offered something that did not require a response, and she left. Mara sat down at the table. She ate the food, which was good. She looked out the window at the street below, which was in its early evening mode. People coming home from things, dogs being walked, the light going golden and then orange. She thought about the pencil faces on the walls. She thought about the woman who had made them, and whether she had been running toward something or away from something, and whether the distinction had mattered to her in the end. She was thinking this thought when she heard the sound from outside, a car, pulling up on the street below with a specific kind of unhurriedness that made her look without meaning to. It was a dark car, the kind of plain, capable vehicle that people used when they did not want to be noticed for their vehicle. It stopped in front of the laundromat. The engine went off. The door opened. She saw him from above, which was a strange way to see a person for the first time in 6 weeks. The top of his head, his shoulders, the particular way he stood when he got out of a car, straight and still, taking in the surroundings with one slow look before moving. She knew that look. She had been in rooms when he did that look. It was the same whether he was entering a formal space or a parking lot. Kale. He was alone, which surprised her. He had one bag. He did not look up. She stepped back from the window. Not in panic. She had already decided against panic, very deliberately, long before this moment. She had known this would happen. She had not known when, and she had not known he would come personally, but she had known someone would come eventually, and she had decided, also very deliberately, what she would do when that happened. She stood in the middle of her small room and breathed for a moment. Then she picked up her bag, the real one, not the one with the essential documents, which was a different bag, already packed, kept at the back of the wardrobe, and she held it for a moment, weighing the reflex. She put it back down. She sat in the chair by the window, angled so she was not directly visible from below. She picked up her book. She waited. She heard him go into the laundromat. She heard, faintly, voices, Kale's low, and Clara's warmer, and then a pause, and she thought, "Clara, you wonderful woman, tell him nothing," and Clara, who did not know any of this, would tell him whatever seemed polite to tell, which probably meant a name, and a floor, and a door number. She heard footsteps on the outside stairs, a knock on her door, measured, not urgent. She was very calm when she stood up and walked to the door and opened it. He looked exactly like himself. That was the first coherent thought she had. He was wearing a jacket she did not recognize, dark, and he had not shaved, which was unusual. And his eyes had something in them she had not expected. Not anger, not relief, not triumph. Something more careful than any of those things. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. She said, "I know you found me." He said nothing. She stepped back from the door, which was not an invitation, but was not a refusal either. It was an acknowledgement that they would need to have this conversation somewhere, and it might as well be here. He came in. He did not come in far. He stood near the door and looked at the room, quickly, the same way he had looked at the street below. She went to the table and sat down. She put her hands flat on the table. She had rehearsed a number of things to say when this moment came, and now that it was here, she found she did not want to say any of them. They had all been built for a version of this conversation she thought would be louder. He said, "You look well." "I am well," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at the room again. The slanted ceiling, the pregnancy book on the table, the jar of ginger chews on the windowsill. He looked at these things without expression. He said, "I am not going to ask you to come back." She had not expected that. She waited. He said, "Not tonight. I am not asking for anything tonight." She looked at him. He was standing near the door with his bag at his feet and his hands at his sides, not crowding the room, not pressing anything, just standing there, like a person who had driven 4 hours and arrived somewhere and was not yet sure what the next thing was. She said, "Why did you come alone?" "Because sending someone else was wrong," he said, simply, without qualification. The room was very quiet. Outside, the street went about its evening. The light through the window had turned the amber gold of late day. She thought about a number of things in rapid succession. She thought about the succession documents the council would have prepared by now. She thought about Rin, who she knew well enough to predict. She thought about what it meant that Kale was here alone, without the machinery. She said, "Are you going to tell me it will be different?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not tonight," he said again. "Tonight I only came to see that you were safe." "I am safe," she said. "I made myself safe." "I know," he said, and in his voice was the particular quality she had caught once or twice before, something that was not quite admiration, but was in its neighborhood. "I know you did." She looked at him. He looked at her. The distance between them was the length of a small room, and also, in some way neither of them was ready to measure, much larger than that. He said, "Can I sit down?" She thought about it, not for very long. She said, "Yes." He sat down in the chair she had been sitting in. She stayed where she was, at the table. She pushed her book aside. She thought, "I made 2 cups of tea this morning out of habit." There was a moment in which she had done it, and then looked at the 2 cups, and stood there for a moment, before pouring the second one down the sink. She did not say this. She said, "I am not going back." He said, "I heard you." She said, "That is not a negotiating position. It is the situation." He said, "All right." The word sat between them. She turned it over, looking for the catch in it, the way she always looked for the catch in simple words. She did not immediately find one. She said, "You cannot just say all right." He looked at her with those careful eyes. He said, "What would you have me say instead?" She thought about it. She genuinely could not answer, because she had prepared for arguments, for authority, for the weight of an institution arriving at her door. She had not prepared for a man sitting in her chair looking at her like someone who has arrived at a decision and is living in the first minutes of it. She said, "What did you tell the council?" He said, "That the situation is being addressed. And when they ask again?" "I will say the same thing." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Elder Voss, whom she had always liked, who had a quality of seeing things clearly and saying them plainly. She thought about Rin, whom she liked less, but understood better. She thought about the documents in the council chamber, drafted and waiting. She said, "How long can you hold them?" He said, "Long enough." "For what?" He looked at her. He said, "I am not sure yet. I thought you might have some ideas." She almost laughed. It was a reflex, and she pressed it down, but not before he saw it, and something in his face shifted very slightly in response. Not a smile, but the architecture of one. They sat in the quiet room above the laundromat. The light outside moved toward evening. Clara was folding things below. The street went on with itself. Mara did not agree to anything. She did not go back. She did not make any commitments. But she went to the small kettle on the dresser and filled it with water and switched it on, and she got out 2 mugs and the tin of tea. She did not say anything about the second cup. She just made it and put it in front of him, and she sat back down, and they sat there together in the fading evening light in her small room, with the slanted ceiling and the east window. Neither of them said what the cups meant. Neither of them needed to. Outside, the laundromat sign began its evening buzzing, blue-white and steady, and the town moved into its Tuesday dusk, and 2 people sat with hot tea in a small room, 4 hours from everything that had been pulling at both of them, and the silence between them was not empty. It was, for the first time in 6 weeks, shared. He came back the next day. Mara heard his footsteps on the outside stairs at 9 in the morning, before she had finished her tea, and she sat at the table and waited for the knock without moving. When it came, measured, not urgent, the same as before, she got up and opened the door. He had coffee from Helen's, 2 cups. He held them both in one hand, the way you carry things when you are trying not to look like you have planned this. She looked at the cups. She said, "There is coffee in this building." He said, "Helen's is better." She stepped back. He came in. He had taken the room at the end of the hall. The one that Dot had mentioned was available. She had not asked about this. She had simply known it. with the same quiet certainty she had about most things, that he would stay, and that he would stay in a way that did not crowd her, because he was, whatever else, a man who understood the difference between presence and pressure. He had apparently learned her mourning through asking no one in particular, or perhaps he had watched the timing of her light from his window. Either was possible with him. He put one cup on the table in front of her. He sat down in the chair that had become, over the course of one evening, the chair he sat in, and he held his own coffee in both hands and looked out the window at the street below. She sat down across from him. She wrapped her hands around the cup. Helen's coffee was, in fact, better. They did not speak for a little while. This was something she had not expected, that there was a version of him that was comfortable with quiet. She had known him in rooms that were never quiet, where things were always in motion, where he was always in some state of managing or deciding or directing. The compound was not a place that ever fully settled. She had not had a clear picture of what he was like when there was nothing he needed to do. He was, she was discovering, quite still. She said, "You have not called the council." It was not a question. She would have felt the difference in the air if the machinery had moved. "No," he said. "Rin will come looking for you soon." "He will come looking for me soon regardless," Cale said. "Calling him will not change the timeline. It will only give him information about where I am." She looked at her coffee cup. She thought about Rin, the particular determined quality of him, the way he moved through problems like they were equations rather than situations. She did not dislike Rin. She understood him, which was different. She said, "He will figure out where you are, from the travel records." "Yes. And then he will come here." "Probably," Cale said. "And what will you do then?" He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Tell me what you want me to do." She had not expected that either. She looked at him carefully. "That is not how this works," she said. "That is not how anything in the pack works." "I know how the pack works," he said. "I wrote most of it. I am asking you." She held the coffee cup. She thought about how to answer an honest question honestly. She said, "I want you to stop the succession documents." He said, "Done." She said, "Not done. It requires a council session and a majority vote. The council passed those documents without your signature, and you know they have concurrent authority in succession matters." He said, "I know. I wrote that provision." "Then you know I am right." "You are right," he said, simply, without argument. She looked at him. He was looking out the window again. Below them, Clara was sweeping the sidewalk outside the laundromat with a wide broom, moving in slow, even strokes. "You are not arguing with me," Mara said. "I read the law when you left," he said. "The same sections you read. I spent 2 days with them." She was quiet for a moment. He said, "I understand why you went." She said nothing. He said, "That is not the same as saying it was not difficult." He paused. "It was difficult. It is difficult." She looked at him. His face was not performing anything. She had spent 2 years watching him navigate rooms full of people trying to read him, and she had become skilled at identifying the specific texture of honesty in his voice, the way it went quieter, not louder, when he meant something. He was quiet. She said, "Liam is 31 years old, and he lives 3 states away, and we speak twice a year." He turned to look at her when she said her brother's name. "He was named a pack heir at 6 weeks old," she said. "He was raised knowing what he was before he knew who he was. I will not do that." Cale was very still. She continued, because she had decided to say this, and she was going to say all of it. "Your succession law does not require consent. It does not ask whether the mother agrees. It activates on birth, and it moves on a timeline set by the council, not by the family. I read every section. I read the footnotes. I read the amendments from the last 12 years. There is nowhere in it a space for what I want." He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want?" She put her coffee cup down. She looked at him with the clarity of someone who has spent 6 weeks preparing for a question. "I want to choose whether my child is named an heir. I want that choice to be mine, not the council's, not pack laws, mine." He held that. She watched him hold it, not dismissing it, not translating it into something more manageable, just holding the actual shape of what she had said. He said, "That would require changing the law." "Yes," she said. "That takes time." "Yes," she said again. He looked at her. She looked back. The morning light was doing the thing it did at this hour. coming in at a low angle through the east window, laying itself flat across the table, making everything in the room look more deliberate than usual. He said, "Tell me what you need, specifically, in order." She blinked, just slightly. He said, "I am not arguing, I am asking. Tell me what you need, and I will work out what I can do." She thought about the question for a moment. The genuine size of it. No one had asked her that in a long time. Not in those specific words, in that specific order, with that specific quality of intending to follow through. She said, "I need the succession documents stopped. Formally. Not just held." He said, "I will call an emergency session. I will invoke alpha override. The council will push back. I will let them push, and I will hold the override." She said, "I need the naming rights to remain with me. Whatever happens between us, whatever form this takes." He said, "Write it and I will sign it." She said, "I need time." He said, "You have it." She looked at him. She thought, "I do not fully trust this yet." She also thought, "I am going to try." She picked up her coffee cup. She finished the coffee. She set it down. She said, "What is your middle name?" He looked at her, surprised, in the contained way he did surprise. "Henry," he said. She said, "I am not naming the child Henry." He said, "I did not suggest that you should. I wanted to make that clear early," she said. He said, "Noted." Below them, Clara had finished sweeping. She was standing on the sidewalk, hands on the broom handle, looking up at the sky, with the meditative quality of someone who has nowhere in particular to be for a moment, and is enjoying it. Mara looked out at the same sky, blue and ordinary, and very high up. She said, "There is a diner down the street. If you are going to be here, you should know that the eggs are good, and the pie is exceptional, and the woman behind the counter is named Helen, and she will remember whatever you order from the first day." Cale said, "All right." She stood up. She put on her coat. "I go in the morning usually." He said, "All right," again, and he stood up too. She picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time. She said, "I am not going back to the compound." He said, "I am not asking you to." She looked at him one more time. She said, "Come on then." And they walked out of the room together into the quiet morning, down the outside stairs, past Clara, who looked up and smiled at her in the easy, uncomplicated way of someone who has no idea what is happening, but is glad to see her neighbor, and out onto the sidewalk and down the street toward Helen's diner, where the morning was warm, and the eggs were good, and the pie sat in the case by the door like a promise that some ordinary things could be trusted. Neither of them said anything on the walk. The town went around them, indifferent and kind. It was not fixed. Nothing was fixed. The council was still there, and Rin was still there, and the documents were still in a drawer somewhere, and there were weeks and months of difficult things waiting on the other side of this morning. But the morning itself was just a morning, and they were in it together. And that was, right now, enough to keep moving. Mara told him on a Thursday evening, 9 days after he arrived. It had been raining since afternoon. Steady, unhurried rain, the kind that does not intend to stop anytime soon. She had spent the day at her table with a book she was not really reading, listening to it against the window. At 5 she had made soup from what she had in the room, and at 6 she had knocked on his door, which was a thing she had not done before, and held up the second bowl. He had looked at her and the bowl. He had taken the bowl. She had come in. They sat at the table while the rain continued. He ate without commenting on the soup, which she took as a good sign, because commenting on food was something you did when you were filling space. He was not filling space. He washed both bowls after in the bathroom sink, which was the only sink in the room, and set them on the windowsill to dry. She watched him do this with the careful attention she brought to things that told her something about a person. He did it efficiently and without display, the way someone does things that they have always done for themselves. She had not thought about whether Cale had ever done his own dishes. It seemed like a small thing. It was not. She said, "I want to tell you something." He came and sat down. He did not reach for anything or lean back. He just sat and looked at her with the full, quiet attention he gave things when he decided something mattered. She said, "Not everything, not tonight, but some of it." He said, "All right." She said, "My mother came to the pack when she was 22. She did not have a choice about coming. She had a choice about staying, later, and she made it, and I understand the reasons she made it, and I have spent a long time not being angry about them. He listened. She said, 3 years after she arrived, she had Liam. The council moved very quickly. The documents were prepared before he was born. She told me that once, quietly, like she was telling me about a fact of weather, rather than something that happened to her. They were prepared before he was born, and she signed them, and afterward she described the signing as the moment she understood what she had agreed to when she agreed to stay. She stopped for a moment. Outside, the rain picked up slightly and then settled back. She said, Liam is a good man. He is a careful, quiet, good man, and he lives 3 states away and calls twice a year. He has a life that is entirely his own, which I think is the thing he needed most, and the thing PAC designation made the most difficult to find. He spent his first 20 years being told he was important to a structure, before he was told he was important to a family. Cale did not speak. She said, I know what you will say, that it will be different this time, that the council is a council, not a sentence, that you can prevent the worst of it. He said, I was not going to say any of those things. She looked at him. He said, I was going to ask you what your mother told you about the signing. She was quiet for a moment. It was not the question she had expected. She said it was the moment she stopped belonging to herself and started belonging to the plan. She paused. She said the words in the documents were beautiful. She said they used words like legacy and future and enduring, and that all of those words were real, but none of them were about her. Cale was very still. She said, I read your succession documents the night I decided to leave. I sat in the compound library at 2 in the morning, and I read every section, and the words were the same. Legacy, future, enduring. She looked at him. Not one sentence about the person having the child, not one line requiring her agreement. He said, after a moment, You are right. I know I am right, she said. I have known I was right since I was 16 years old. He said, I should have seen it before you left. She said, You wrote the law. I did, he said. He said it the way you say things when you are not looking for absolution, just acknowledging a fact. She said, I am not asking you to feel a particular way about that. I am telling you why I went. You asked me, when you arrived, to tell you what I needed. This is the background of what I need. I cannot give you the list without giving you this first. He said, I understand. She said, Liam does not know I am pregnant. He said nothing. She said, I have not called him. I have not told anyone in the family. I have been here alone with this for 8 weeks, and I have been fine, and I do not regret it, but I want you to understand the full picture of what alone has looked like. He looked at his hands. They were on the table, flat and still. She looked at them too. He said, I am sorry. She said, For which part? He said, For the law, for not reading it differently, for not understanding what was in it when I wrote it. He paused. For being a person who needed you to leave before I looked at my own work clearly. She sat with that. She sat with it for a real amount of time, turning it over the way she turned things over, looking for the useful and true parts of it. She said, Did you look at it? After I left? I spent 2 days in the library, he said. I read every section you would have read. And I found 3 provisions that should not exist, he said, and several places where the absence of language is its own provision, places where the law is silent on consent because the drafters did not consider it a question worth asking. She said, What did you do with what you found? I started drafting an amendment, he said. She looked at him. He said, I did not know if I would ever be able to give it to you. I did not know where you were, but I started it. She said, Show me. He went to his room and came back with a folder. He put it on the table between them. She opened it. The amendment was handwritten, his handwriting, which she had seen on enough documents to know, small and precise and covering 6 pages. She read the first page, and the second, and on the 3rd page she stopped. She said, You revised the consent requirement. Yes. It requires written, witnessed, freely given consent from the partner before any succession documentation can be prepared, at any stage. Yes. She read the clause again. She said, The definition of freely given is specific. It excludes consent given under institutional pressure or within 30 days of a formal succession discussion. I added that on the 4th day, he said. I realized that defining consent without defining coercion was not enough. She sat back. She looked at him across the table. The rain was still going. The room was warm from the lamp. She said, "This is good legal language." He said, "Thank you." She said, "I am going to revise Section 4. He said, "I thought you might." She found a pencil in her bag. She pulled the pages toward her. He watched her read through it, and she could feel him watching, not with impatience, but with the particular quality of someone watching another person do something well. She made 4 annotations in pencil. She slid the pages back. He read the annotations. He said, "The definition gap in Section 4. The partner is defined at the point of succession, but not at the point of conception," she said. "That gap could be used to argue backward about status. Close it." He said, "I see it." He made a note in the margin. She said, "The enforcement provision on page 5 has no teeth. You need a designated neutral party for disputes, not the council, because the council has institutional interest." He said, "An independent legal office. Or an elected liaison," she said, "but it cannot be the council." He said, "I will add it." She said, "When you present this, they will push back on the consent definition. Someone will argue that requiring witnesses and a 30-day waiting period makes the process too slow and too complex." "Probably Rin," Cale said. "Yes," she said. "Tell Rin that complexity is what happens when you care about getting it right." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted in a way she had not seen before. She could not name it precisely. She turned away from it. She said, "I am going to call Liam." He said, "I know." "Not tonight," she said. "But soon." He said, "All right." She closed the folder. She pushed it back toward him. She said, "Keep working on it. Finish it properly. I want to read the full version when it is done." He said, "You will have it." She stood up. She picked up her book from the bed, the one she had not been reading. She said, "Good night." He said, "Good night," and he picked up the folder and went back to his room at the end of the hall. She turned off the lamp. She stood in the dark for a moment. The rain was quieter now, or she had gotten used to it. She thought about her mother's voice, describing the signing, the way she had used the word beautiful for the words in the documents, and then followed it with, "But none of them were about her." She thought about 6 pages of handwritten legal language, started in a compound library by a man who did not know if he would ever be able to give them to her. She did not know what to do with that yet, so she put it in the place where she kept things that needed more time. She got into bed. She pulled the blanket up. She put her hand on her stomach. She said quietly, to the room and the rain and whoever might be listening, "Eleanor, if you are a girl. Eleanor, who came before all of us." The rain went on. She slept. On the 5th day after Cale arrived, Rin came. Mara heard the car first. She was at the table with her pregnancy book and her tea when the sound reached her. Not 1 car but 2, pulling onto the street below with the coordinated patience of people who have agreed on a destination. She set the book down and looked out the window. 2 vehicles, dark, practical. She recognized the first one. She looked at it for 3 seconds. Then she stood up. She did not act from fear, because she had already decided not to. She moved to the door, and she paused with her hand on the handle, and she thought very precisely about what she was going to do. She put on her coat. She picked up the bag she kept by the door. Not the essential bag, not the one with documents, but the one that looked like an ordinary bag for a person going about an ordinary morning. She opened the door and went downstairs, and through the laundromat, past Clara, who looked up but did not ask, and out onto the street from the back entrance that opened onto the side alley. She walked around the block. She crossed the street. She went to Helen's diner. Cale was already there. He was at the counter, which was where he always sat, and he had a coffee in front of him that he had not touched, and his face when she walked in was the face of someone who had been watching the door. She sat down next to him. Helen came over. Mara ordered eggs and toast. Helen refilled Cale's coffee without being asked and left. Cale said, "You saw them." 2 cars, she said. "I recognized the first vehicle." "Rin," he said. "Yes." He looked at his coffee. He was doing the thing she had come to know over the past few days, where his face stayed level, while something behind it was moving very fast. He said, "He does not know which building. He will ask at the diner first," Mara said. "That is where I would start," Cale said. "Then we have about 12 minutes. They looked at each other across the 12 minutes. She said, "What are you going to tell him?" "The truth," Cale said, "that I am here, and that it is my decision." "He will have papers," she said. "The succession documents. He came here to deliver them." "I know. He has concurrent council authority in succession matters." "I know that too," Cale said. "I know him. He will have studied the provisions." Helen's diner was warm, and smelled like coffee and toast, and the morning regulars were there, the man with the work jacket and his paper, 2 women in the booth by the window, the retired man from the hardware shop down the road who always ordered the same thing. None of them were listening. All of them were simply there, existing in the cheerful, uncomplicated way of people in a diner who are between other things. Mara picked up her coffee, which had appeared at some point without her noticing. She said, "You should know that I have a copy of those succession documents. I took them from the library the night I read them. I have my own annotations on them." He looked at her. She said, "I know the legal language as well as Rin does. Possibly better, because I was looking for vulnerabilities." He said, "Did you find any?" She said, "Yes, 3. He was very still. Then he said, 'Show me.'" She put her bag on the counter and took out a folded set of papers. She had been carrying them for 6 weeks. She unfolded them on the counter and smoothed them flat. They were covered in her handwriting, small, precise, in pencil, the kind of annotations that come from reading something many times in many moods. He leaned over and read. He read quickly and without asking questions, and she watched his eyes move across the text and the handwriting, and she could see him absorbing it, cross-referencing it against what he already knew. He said, "Here." He put his finger on a section. "This provision has a residency requirement. The partner must be resident in PAC territory for the activation period to apply." "Yes," she said, "which I am not." "Which you are not," he confirmed. "If that argument holds, the Council's concurrent authority does not engage until you return to territory." "I know," she said. "I identified that 6 weeks ago, but Rin will have seen it too. He will have a counter-argument." "What counter-argument?" She pointed to a footnote. "The 2019 amendment. It extends the residency definition to include extended absence of less than 90 days, on the grounds that temporary departure should not be used to circumvent succession rights." Cale read the footnote. His jaw moved very slightly. She said, "I have been gone 57 days. He looked at her. She looked back. She said, "I had 33 days left." He said, very quietly, "You were timing it." "I was timing everything," she said. "I have been timing everything since I left." He sat with that for a moment. She watched him sit with it, not with any visible emotion, but with the specific quality of someone revising a picture they had been holding. He said, "What is your third vulnerability?" She pointed to a different section. "Consent clause, buried in the 2014 revisions. It requires that succession documentation be presented to the partner directly and signed acknowledging receipt." "The Council sent documents directly to you?" "They did not," she said. "They prepared them. They are going to have Rin deliver them this morning." "So they have not yet met the requirement?" "No." He looked at the papers. He looked at her. He said, "If I invoke Alpha Override today, the Council will challenge it. The challenge goes to a formal hearing. That takes 4 weeks minimum." She said, "In 4 weeks, the 90-day residency provision will have expired." He said, "Yes." She said, "So if you invoke override today, and I stay here, the concurrent authority window closes." He said, "Yes." They looked at each other. He said, "You worked this out before you left." "Most of it," she said. "The consent clause I found 2 weeks after I arrived. I was not certain about it until I verified it against the 2014 text." Helen arrived with Mara's eggs and toast and refilled both their coffees. She looked at the papers spread on the counter, with the professional calm of someone who has seen many things at diner counters over many years, and she went back to her work. Mara folded the papers and put them back in her bag. she said. I am telling you this because you asked me what I need. This is what I need. I need you to invoke override today, before Ryan gets inside this diner, and I need to stay here for 33 more days. He said, all right. She said, after that I need the law amended. I know that takes time. I know that requires a longer process. I am not asking for it today. I am asking for the override today. He said, all right. She said, I am not asking for promises about the other things right now. Just the override. He said, Mara. She stopped. He looked at her. He said, I am going to invoke the override. I am going to do it in the next few minutes. And then I am going to eat breakfast with you, and we are going to be here when Rin walks in, and I am going to handle Rin, and you are not going to disappear from this room. She said, I was not planning to disappear from this room. He said, good. He took his phone out. He made 2 calls. The first one was brief. He told someone named Felix to prepare an emergency council notification for Alpha Override, effective immediately. Reference Succession Case 114. And Felix said yes with the speed of someone who has been waiting for the call. The second call was to Soren, who he told in 7 words that Rin was to be redirected to Kale's position for a direct conversation. He put the phone in his pocket. He picked up his coffee. He said, your eggs are getting cold. She looked at him. She picked up her fork. She ate 2 bites before the diner door opened and Rin walked in. He was wearing a pack jacket and carrying a folder, and he came through the door with the forward momentum of someone who has driven 4 hours and knows exactly why. He stopped when he saw Kale at the counter. He stopped again when he saw Mara next to him. His face went through several things in very rapid succession. He walked over. He stood on the other side of Kale. He said, formally, Alpha. Kale said, Rin, sit down. Rin sat down. He put the folder on the counter and looked at it, and then at Kale, and then, briefly, and without hostility, at Mara. He said, I have papers from the council. Kale said, I know. I also just filed an Alpha override on the succession proceedings, effective 20 minutes ago. Rin was quiet. He said, the council has concurrent authority. They do, Kale said, until an Alpha override is filed, at which point proceedings pause pending a formal hearing. You know the process. Rin looked at the folder. He said, the override needs a substantive basis. The council will challenge a procedural override. The override is not procedural, Kale said. The substantive basis is that the partner is not resident in PAC territory, and the 90-day provision has not yet elapsed. Rin went very still. Helen appeared from nearby and said, coffee, to Rin, and he said, somewhat absently, yes, and she poured it. He picked up the cup, held it, put it down without drinking. He said, the 2019 amendment does not apply, Kale said. Temporary absence definition has a good faith requirement. The absence must be for reasons other than specifically avoiding succession proceedings. I am prepared to argue that the circumstances of this departure meet the good faith exception. Rin looked at Mara. She looked back at him. He said, you consulted a legal expert. She said, I read the law. He held her look for a moment. He was not angry. She had said this to Kale, and she meant it about Rin too. He was not a bad man, and he was not doing this from any motive she could not understand. He believed he was protecting the PAC's future. He had been given a task by an institution he trusted, and he had driven 4 hours to fulfill it, and now the ground had shifted under the task. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He looked out the window at the street. He said, the council will challenge the override. They will try, Kale said. The hearing takes 4 weeks minimum. A pause. She watched Rin do the same calculation she had done. He said, the 90-day window closes in 33 days, Kale said. Rin set his cup down. He looked at the folder in front of him. He said, I am going to have to report this to the council. I know, Kale said. They will not be pleased. I know that too. Rin looked at him. He said, are you certain about this, Kale? It was the first time he had used the name rather than the title, and she noted it. Kale said, yes. Rin sat for a moment longer. Then he picked up the folder and he put it inside his jacket. He stood up. He said, I will be in touch. He looked at Mara. He said, "I want you to know that the council's intention has always been the stability of the pack." She said, "I know." He nodded. He left. The diner went on. The coffee was still warm. Her eggs were cold. Helen appeared and said, "Let me get you fresh ones," without being asked, and took the plate away. Mara looked at the counter in front of her for a moment. She thought about the folder inside Rin's jacket. She thought about the council chamber and the 14 seats, and the one that was empty now. She thought about Elder Voss, whom she had liked, who had left. She thought about the 33 days. She looked at Cale. His hands were on the counter, flat and still. She looked at his hands. She thought about what it cost him to sit here and do this, to invoke an override against his own counsel, to put himself on the side of a situation that was not going to make his life easier. She thought about asking. She decided not to. Some things were real without being said. Helen brought fresh eggs. Cale ordered something. They ate. Outside the window, the town went on. Rin's cars were gone from the street when she looked. The laundromat sign, visible from the corner, buzzed quietly in the daylight, blue and white and steady. 33 days. She could do 33 days. She could do a great deal more than that, if it came to it. She picked up her fork. She ate her eggs. The morning moved forward. The cassette tape had been in Mara's bag for 3 years, since the afternoon she found it in the back of her mother's wardrobe, wrapped in a square of flannel that smelled faintly of cedar. She had played it once, standing alone in a room she was in the process of clearing out, 3 weeks after her mother died. She had played it and listened to all 12 minutes of it, and then she had wrapped it back in its flannel, and put it in her bag, and not taken it out again. She had moved it from bag to bag, always ensuring it came with her. She had not forgotten it was there. She had not stopped thinking about it, exactly. She had simply arrived at a particular arrangement with it. The way you arrive at an arrangement with a difficult piece of furniture. You work around it. You account for it in your planning. You simply do not address it directly. Now she sat cross-legged on her bed, in the room above the laundromat, at 10:30 on a Friday evening, with the tape in her hands. Cale was sitting on the floor beside the bed, his back against the bed frame, a cup of tea cooling on the floor next to him. He had been there for an hour. They had been talking, earlier, and then not talking, in the comfortable way that had developed between them over the past 2 weeks, a rhythm of conversation and silence that she had not experienced with him before, and had not expected. She had not planned this moment. She had not decided this evening would be the evening. She had simply reached into her bag for a different reason entirely, and her hand had found the flannel before it found what she was looking for, and she had sat with it for a moment, and then she had taken it out. She held it now in her lap, in the flannel cloth. She looked at it. Cale had not asked what it was. He was looking at the wall in front of him, not at her, in the way he did when he was giving her room to be somewhere without commentary. She said, "My grandmother recorded this." He said nothing, just turned his head slightly toward her, to let her know he was listening. She said, "She died 3 years before I was born. I never met her. She left the pack when my mother was 4 years old." She stopped. She started again. "She sent this tape to my mother before she died, or someone sent it after. I am not entirely certain. I found it when I was clearing out my mother's things." He was very still. She said, "I played it once. She is talking about a recipe. Bread. It is 12 minutes of a woman in a kitchen explaining how to make bread, and at the end she says something that—" She stopped again. He waited. She said, "I have carried it for 3 years. I have not played it again." A pause. She looked at the tape in her hands. It was an ordinary cassette, the small kind. The label handwritten in a hand she did not know. Eleanor, 1991. She said, "I think I would like to play it now." He said, "All right." She looked at him. He was looking at her now. His face was the careful, steady face he had when he was not managing anything, just present. She had a small cassette player. She had bought it at the second-hand shop 2 weeks after arriving in town, without fully explaining to herself why. She had known, she thought. On some level, she had known the time was coming. She got it down from the shelf. She put the tape in. She pressed the button. Static, for a moment. Then the sound of a kitchen. Faint sounds. A chair, a drawer, something being set on a counter. And then her grandmother's voice. It was a voice she had heard once before, and had been carrying in her head ever since. Low and warm and a little wry, with the particular quality of someone who is comfortable in their own space. She said, "Right, so, the bread. You start with the yeast, and you have to let it do its thing before you rush into anything else, which I know is not your strong point, but patience is the whole game with yeast." A laugh. Her grandmother laughed at herself, and the laugh was so natural, so unperformed, that Mara felt something loosen in her chest. She listened. Cale sat on the floor beside the bed and listened. The recipe went on. The flour, the water temperature, the folding technique, the particular quality of the dough when it was right. Her grandmother was precise and funny, and occasionally sidetracked herself, and the whole 12 minutes had the feeling of being allowed to stand in a kitchen with someone who did not know you were watching. Near the end, her grandmother said, "I know I am not there. I know that means something. I hope you understand it as love." And then it ended. The static returned, and then the mechanical click of the tape running out. Mara pressed stop. She sat in the quiet. She was not crying. She was very still in the way that comes before or after something, and she sat with her hands in her lap and the player on the bed beside her, and the room was quiet. Cale did not speak immediately. He did not offer her a word to pin the feeling to. He sat on the floor with his cooling tea, and he let the quiet be what it was. After a while she said, "She was 29 when she left." "Yes," he said. "She spent the rest of her life somewhere else. Alone, mostly, from what I understand." She paused. "She sent that tape. That is the whole contact she had. 12 minutes of bread, and one sentence." He said, very quietly, "What do you think she meant by love?" She thought about it. She said, "I think she meant that leaving was the act of love, that staying would have cost more than she could give." She stopped. "I think she was protecting something. Herself, yes. But also the possibility of being intact, of having something left of herself that was actually hers." He said, "Do you understand it that way? Now?" She looked at the tape in her hands. She said, "I understand it more than I did before this year." He said nothing. She said, "I am not her. I am not making the same choice. I am not going to a different life alone and sending a tape." She felt the weight of that certainty as she said it. "But I understand the thing she was reaching for, the thing underneath the choice." He said, "What thing?" She said, "The thing that is yours, the part of yourself that no system and no structure and no succession document can touch. The thing that stays yours because you kept it." Cale was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want you to know something." She waited. He said, "I am going to get the law changed, the naming rights provision. I am going to draft a bill and put it in front of the council, and I am going to argue for it, and I am going to keep arguing until it passes. It will not be fast. Council reform never is." He stopped. "But I am going to do it. That is not a negotiating position. It is a plan." She looked at him. He said, "And the succession documents. I am going to make sure they cannot be activated without your explicit written consent. Mine is not enough. Yours is required. That is also part of the plan." She said, "You are describing a significant restructuring of pack succession law." "Yes," he said. "The council will resist it. I know that. It will take time." "I know that too." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about all the things she was good at assessing: intention, sincerity, the specific texture of a promise that a person intends to keep versus one they intend to try to keep and might not. She had spent her whole life reading those textures. He meant this. She could hear it. Not as certainty. Plans were not certainties, but as genuine commitment to the direction of the thing. She said, "If it is a girl, I am naming her Eleanor." He was still for a moment. Then he said, "That is a good name." "It is her name," Mara said. "My grandmother's. I am giving it back." She looked at the cassette player on the bed. She looked at the tape inside it. She thought about Eleanor in a kitchen in 1991, alone, talking to a daughter she had not seen in decades, explaining how to make bread, finding the largest thing she had to say at the very end in the smallest possible words. She said, "I understand it as love. That is what I think she meant. That leaving was the most love she had and she gave it." Cale said, Maybe you are doing the same thing, in a different direction. She looked at him. What do you mean? He said, leaving the compound was an act of love. For the child. You were protecting them before you had any way to protect them directly. He paused. That is the same instinct. Running toward something, not away. She sat with that. She sat with it for a long time. She thought, nobody has ever said that to me. She thought, I did not know I needed to hear it said. She did not say either of those things. She pressed them into the place where she kept things that were real and did not need to be louder. She reached over and turned off the light on the shelf. The room went dark except for the low light from the street outside, the blue-white of the laundromat sign coming through the curtain. She said, I am going to sleep. He said, all right. He picked up his tea. He stood up slowly. He looked at her for a moment, in the dark room, and his face was the face of someone who has heard something important and is deciding where to put it. He said, good night, Mara. She said, good night. He went out, pulling the door very quietly closed behind him. She lay back on the bed in the dark. She held the cassette player against her chest, very lightly. She looked at the ceiling. The laundromat sign made its familiar blue shadow on the wall. She thought about Eleanor in her kitchen. She thought about the bread she had never eaten. She thought about the recipe, precise and warm, and given freely across 30-odd years. She put her hand over her stomach. She thought, Eleanor, if you are a girl. Eleanor, who was here before either of us. She closed her eyes. She slept, deeply this time, the kind of sleep that comes after something has been set down. And on the wall, the blue light moved, as the sign outside did its steady work, and the night held everything quietly, and the tape sat in its player, and nothing was resolved yet, and all of it was still ahead of them. But Mara had played the tape. And in some way she could feel but not yet name, that changed the shape of everything that followed. 33 days passed. They passed the way time passes when you are inside something significant, slowly in the individual hours and fast in the accumulation of them. Mara marked them not on a calendar, but in her body, in the particular way the weeks arranged themselves around appointments and meals, and the growing, unmistakable fact of what was happening inside her. The council challenged the override. Cale attended the formal hearing by phone, from the room at the end of the hall, while Mara sat at her table and read her book and listened without meaning to. The hearing was procedural and careful and lasted 3 hours. The council's challenge was on narrow legal grounds and did not hold. Rin called twice. Both calls were brief and professional. The second one ended with him saying, in the particular tone of someone reassigning their perspective, I see, and then silence, and then goodbye. Elder Voss sent a letter. It was handwritten, on plain paper, and addressed to Mara by name. It contained 1 paragraph. She had left the council because she could see which way the situation was moving, and she believed the council's role in it had been wrong. She did not blame Cale, who she thought was, for the first time since she had known him, moving correctly. She asked Mara to take care of herself. Mara kept the letter in her bag next to the cassette tape. The 33rd day arrived on a Wednesday, gray and quiet, with rain on the windows and Clara running the laundromat machines on a longer cycle because of the damp. Mara sat at her table and did not perform any ceremony around the day. She made tea, she read, she went to Helen's for breakfast and sat at the counter and ate eggs, and looked at the rain on the window and felt the particular settledness of a plan that has worked. Cale was there, at the counter, as he usually was. He had been there every morning for 33 days, not as surveillance but as habit, a small shared routine that had developed without announcement, the way the best habits do. He said, the window closed at midnight. She said, I know. He said, the council's concurrent authority is expired. She said, I know. Helen brought coffee, they drank it. He said, I am going to call a council session next week. I want to present the draft amendment before they have a chance to reorganize around the new situation. She said, the draft you showed me last Thursday. With the revisions you made to Section 4, he said. She had revised Section 4 because the original language left a gap around the definition of partner that she did not like, and she had said so, and he had looked at her revisions and said she was right, and incorporated them without debate. She had been somewhat startled by this. She said, I have some additional notes on the consent clause. The language is strong, but the enforcement mechanism needs more specificity. He said, "Bring them when you come back." She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. She said, "When I come back." "When you are ready to come back," he said. "Not before." She looked at the rain on the window. The street outside was quiet, wet, the shop awnings dripping. A man in a yellow coat walked by quickly with his collar up. She thought about what coming back meant. She thought about it precisely, which was the only way she thought about things. It meant the council chamber, and the 14 seats, and eventually her own presence at a table where decisions were made. It meant a law being changed, slowly, through the difficult machinery of institutional reform. It meant Rin, who she had decided to trust cautiously and verify consistently. It meant Pack territory, and the compound, and all the architecture of a life she had walked away from, which would now need to be rebuilt with different specifications. It meant sitting across from Cale Drennan in formal rooms, and knowing things about him she had not known before, which was, she thought, an advantage she had not anticipated gaining from this particular sequence of events. She said, "I want the amendment drafted and presented before I return. I want to see the council's response before I put myself back in that building." He said, "Fair." She said, "I want the naming rights document signed by you and witnessed before I return." He said, "I will have it ready." She said, "I want my brother's status reviewed, Liam's, the terms of his designation as heir. I want that reviewed under the new amendment." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "That is a separate and complex matter." "I know," she said. "I am not asking for it resolved before I return. I am telling you, it is on the list." He said, "I understand." She picked up her coffee. She looked at him. She said, "When I come back, I want a seat at the table in the council sessions." He looked at her. She said, "I want a formal role, not observer status, a seat, with voice and vote on matters that directly affect the terms of our agreement." He said, "That has never existed before." She said, "No, it has not." I looked. She set her cup down. "There is nothing in the law that prohibits it. There is just nothing that provides for it, which means you can create it." He looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze with the patience of someone who has learned when to be patient. He said, "The council will not like it." "No," she said, "they will not. They will argue that it sets a precedent." "It does set a precedent," she said. "That is the point." He looked at the counter. He looked at his coffee. He looked out at the rain. He said, "I will create the provision." She said, "In writing, before I return." He said, "In writing." She nodded. She picked up her coffee. Helen appeared and set down 2 plates of eggs without being asked. She looked at both of them with the warm, businesslike expression she wore when something was being resolved at her counter, which happened more often than restaurants usually accounted for. Mara picked up her fork. She said, "When is the earliest the amendment can come before the council?" He said, 2 weeks, if I push it." She said, "Push it." He said, "All right." They ate. The rain went on outside. Someone came into the diner with an umbrella and shook it at the door and sat in the booth by the window. Helen poured coffee without being asked, in the way she poured everything, with the competence of someone who has mastered her small territory completely. Mara thought about Eleanor. She thought about 31-year-old Liam in his city 3 states away. She thought about the child she was carrying, who was, by now, visible when she wore certain things. A fact she had not yet decided how to feel about, except that it was real and continuing, regardless of her feelings about it. She thought, "Eleanor, if you are a girl, and if you are not, then something else, and we will know it when we see you." She said, "There is one more thing." Cale set down his fork. She said, "I want to call Liam." He said, "Of course." She said, I want to call him, and tell him everything. What is happening, the amendment, the changes. I want him to be able to come back to Pack territory if he chooses to. I want his designation as heir reviewed under the new terms, with his consent this time." He said, "That is going to open a complicated conversation." She said, "Yes, it is." He said, "He may not want to come back." She said, "That is his right, but I want him to have the choice." A long pause. He said, "I will make that possible." She said, "Thank you." She picked up her fork again. She finished her eggs. Outside, the rain eased a little, the street beginning to brighten. She thought about the council session in 2 weeks. She thought about walking into that chamber, not as someone who had been found, but as someone who had negotiated the terms of her return. She thought about the document Cale would have drafted and signed before she stepped through the gate. She thought about Liam picking up the phone. She thought about Eleanor's voice on the cassette tape, explaining bread, patient and warm, finding the largest thing she had to say at the very end. She thought about what it meant to return to a thing you had walked away from, knowing now what you had not known before, carrying the precise tools you had built in the time between. It was not the same thing as forgiving. It was not the same thing as trusting without reservation. It was something more architectural than that, something built rather than felt, a structure with a different foundation than the one she had left. She said, "I will need 3 weeks to prepare." He said, "Take 4. She looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. He said, "Do it right. Do not rush it." She said, "I am always thorough." He said, "I know." She said, 4 weeks then." He said, "I will have everything ready." Helen came by and refilled both their coffees and said, "More toast?" And Mara said yes, and the morning went on, ordinary and warm and smelling of coffee. 4 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, she packed her real bag. The one with the essential documents, the annotated copy of the succession law, the cassette tape in its flannel cloth, the letter from Elder Voss, and 3 new things: the naming rights document bearing Cale's signature and 2 witnesses, the draft amendment she had revised 4 times, and a phone with a new number that she had given only to people she trusted. She left the room above the laundromat at 9 in the morning. She stopped and knocked on Dot's door. Dot opened it in her dressing gown, holding a cup of tea. Mara said, "I am leaving today." Dot said, "I thought you might be." Mara said, "Thank you for the room." Dot said, "You were a good tenant. No noise, no trouble, and you tipped Clara fairly, which not everyone does." Mara said, "I noticed the pencil faces on the wall." Dot looked at her. She said, "The light in this room finds everyone eventually." Mara said, "I think so too." She went downstairs. She stopped in the laundromat. Clara was folding, as always, with her quick, practiced hands. She said, "I am going." Clara said, "Safe travels." Mara said, "Keep the paper if you want it." Clara smiled. She said, "I will." Outside, Cale was waiting by the car. He was not doing anything in particular. He was just standing there, in the morning, in the coat she had come to know. She walked out and stood next to him. She looked down the street, at Helen's diner, at the sign buzzing faintly, even in daylight, at the town that had held her for the better part of 3 months and had not asked more of her than she had to give. She said, "Ready." He opened the passenger door. She got in. He drove. The road south was the same road she had driven north in the dark 3 months ago, alone, with a duffel bag and a pregnancy test folded in her shoe and a silence that had both frightened and sustained her. She looked at it now through the window without the weight of that particular night, though she could feel the memory of it along the edges of the morning, like the residue of something that had mattered. She put her hand on her stomach. The gesture was habit now, easy and uncomplicated. He drove and she sat, and the road moved under them. After a while he turned on the radio, low. She did not know the song. She did not recognize it, and for some reason that felt right. A song she did not know, for a road she was taking differently this time. She thought about the council session in 2 weeks. She thought about the seat she was going to take. She thought about Liam, who she had called the evening before, and the sound of his voice when she said everything she had to say, and the very long silence afterward. And then, "When did you figure all this out?" "Over time," she had said. He had said, "Tell me the beginning." She had told him. All of it. An hour and a half, sitting on her bed in the room above the laundromat for the last time, talking to her brother in his city 3 states away, filling in the spaces that should have been filled long ago. He had said, at the end, "I want to read the amendment." She had said, "I will send it." He had said, "Let me know when the council session is." She had said, "Liam, do you want to come?" A pause. Long enough that she had thought he might say no. Long enough that she had prepared herself for no, which she was willing to accept. He had said, Yes. She had pressed the phone against her chest for a moment. She had said, I will send you the date. Now she sat in the car on the road south, and the morning was bright, and the road was long, and 4 weeks from now she would walk into a council chamber and take a seat that had not existed before she asked for it. She would not be alone in the room. Cale would be at the head, Liam might be in the seat beside hers, or he might not. She did not know yet. Elder Voss had not said she would return, but she had not said she would not. She would be carrying, visibly by then, the child she was going to name Eleanor. She thought about the council members who would look at her and recalculate everything they thought they knew. She thought, let them. She had the law in her bag. She had read every section. She knew the vulnerabilities, and the provisions, and the consent clauses, and the footnotes. She had annotated all of it in her careful pencil hand. She was not walking back in. She was arriving. She looked out the window at the passing landscape, flat and open, the kind of country that did not make promises but did not break them either. She said, what is the name of the road we take from the highway? Cale said, Cedar Run. Used to be elm trees, years ago. She said, what happened to them? He said, storm, 12 years ago. They planted new ones after. They are still small. She said, they will be bigger by now. He said, yes. She said, good. The road moved under them. The morning held. She did not look back.